What happens when privilege meets justice in the most unexpected way? Tiffany Montgomery thought her name and money could save her from anything, until she met Judge Marcus Turner. What he did next left the entire courtroom in stunned silence. This is a story you can't miss. Atlanta, Georgia, a city of contrasts, where towering skyscrapers cast shadows over historic streets. The Montgomery name was one of prestige and wealth, tied to luxury real estate and high-profile charity events. Tiffany Montgomery, the 23-year-old heiress of the Montgomery Empire, had lived her entire life in a bubble of privilege. For Tiffany, rules were mere suggestions, and consequences were for others. So, when she sped through a red light, nearly hitting a pedestrian, she didn't think twice. "Daddy will take care of it," she thought, laughing as her sleek white Porsche disappeared into the distance. What Tiffany didn't realize was that her reckless behavior had been caught on camera, and the pedestrian, an off-duty police officer, was not about to let it slide. A week later, Tiffany arrived at the Fulton County Courthouse, her Chanel handbag swinging as she strutted down the marble hallway in designer heels. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. People had heard about the case. A rich girl with no regard for the law. Judge Marcus Turner, a towering man with a commanding presence, was known for his no-nonsense approach. A former civil rights lawyer, he had built his career advocating for fairness and justice. His courtroom was where privilege ended and accountability began. As Tiffany sauntered in, her lawyer, Blake Henderson, whispered nervously, "Tiffany, remember, be respectful. This judge doesn't play games." Tiffany rolled her eyes, popping her gum. "Relax, Blake. I've got this." The proceedings began. The prosecutor laid out the case with precision, detailing Tiffany's dangerous driving and blatant disregard for the law. Judge Turner listened intently, his piercing eyes studying every detail. When it was Tiffany's turn to speak, she stood with a smirk. "Your Honor, this is all just a big misunderstanding," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I didn't mean to run the red light. I was in a rush to meet a charity committee. You know, giving back to the community." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Turner raised his hand, silencing the crowd. "Miss Montgomery, do you understand the severity of your actions?" he asked. Tiffany waved dismissively. "I mean, sure, but nobody got hurt. I'm sure we can settle this with a fine, right?" The judge's expression darkened. "Miss Montgomery, this is not a negotiation. This is a court of law." Tiffany leaned back, crossing her arms. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this feels like overkill." Gasps filled the room. Blake buried his face in his hands. Judge Turner's voice cut through the tension. "Overkill, Miss Montgomery? Let me show you what accountability looks like." The judge's next words sent shockwaves through the room. "Given your complete lack of remorse, I'm assigning you 100 hours of community service, specifically in the Fulton County Rehabilitation Program." Tiffany blinked, confused. "Rehabilitation? Like therapy?" Judge Turner's lips curved into a stern smile. "No, Miss Montgomery. You'll be working at the Turner Outreach Center, assisting individuals affected by reckless driving accidents. Perhaps seeing the consequences of actions like yours will provide clarity." The whispers returned, louder this time. Tiffany's face turned pale. She opened her mouth to protest, but Judge Turner cut her off. "And Miss Montgomery," he added, "this court will monitor your progress closely. Failure to comply will result in jail time." The courtroom was silent as Judge Turner slammed his gavel. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Tiffany. "How do you feel about the judge's sentence?" one asked. Tiffany's carefully curated composure cracked. "This is ridiculous. I'm being treated like a criminal for a tiny mistake," she snapped, pushing past the cameras. But behind closed doors, Tiffany's father, Charles Montgomery, was livid. "Do you have any idea what this could do to our family's reputation?" he yelled. Tiffany, still defiant, shot back, "It's not my fault that Judge wants to make an example out of me." Charles glared. "You will serve that sentence, Tiffany. No shortcuts, no excuses. If you embarrass this family further, you'll regret it." The next day, Tiffany arrived at the Turner Outreach Center. The atmosphere was nothing like the glitz of her usual surroundings. The walls were plain, the furniture worn, and the faces of those she'd be helping were a stark reminder of the lives her actions could have destroyed. The program coordinator, Linda Evans, greeted her with a clipboard and a sharp tone. "Miss Montgomery, welcome. You'll be shadowing Jacob, one of our volunteers. He'll show you the ropes." Jacob, a quiet man in his 30s, extended a hand. "Let's get started," he said. As Tiffany followed Jacob, her gaze fell on a young woman in a wheelchair, struggling to adjust a brace. Her smile faded. For the first time, reality began to sink in. The air was thick with the scent of cleaning supplies as Tiffany adjusted her gloves, clearly uncomfortable. Jacob handed her a mop. "Today, you'll help clean the therapy room," he said. "Excuse me?" Tiffany asked, looking at him like he'd just asked her to dig a ditch. Jacob shrugged. "Everyone helps around here. That includes you." Muttering under her breath, Tiffany grabbed the mop and started half-heartedly swiping at the floor. Minutes felt like hours as she huffed and groaned, her manicured nails glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Hey," Jacob called out, interrupting her sulking. "See that guy over there?" He nodded toward an older man with a prosthetic leg adjusting his crutches. "His name's Mr. Alton. Lost his leg in a drunk driving accident." Tiffany froze. "Okay. And?" Jacob's eyes narrowed. "And he's the one who designed this program. He knows what it's like to feel invisible, discarded. He's turned his pain into something that helps hundreds of people." Tiffany glanced at Mr. Alton, who caught her staring and gave her a small, kind smile. She quickly looked away, uneasy. As the day progressed, Tiffany was assigned to assist patients during their physical therapy sessions. One of them was a young man named Chris, who was only a few years older than her. His left arm was in a sling, and scars stretched down the side of his face. "What happened to you?" Tiffany asked, curiosity breaking through her usual aloofness. Chris raised an eyebrow. "Car accident. Someone ran a red light." Her stomach twisted. "Oh." He smirked, catching her discomfort. "Relax, princess. I'm not here to guilt-trip you. It was years ago. But yeah, life looks a little different now." Tiffany struggled to find words. I didn't mean." Chris waved her off. "Doesn't matter. You're here, right? That's something." For the first time, Tiffany felt something she hadn't in years: humility. 3 days into her service, Tiffany's heart sank when she spotted Judge Turner walking through the center's double doors. His presence seemed to electrify the room as staff and patients greeted him warmly. "Miss Montgomery," he said, his voice carrying a weight that silenced her protests before they could form. "How are you finding your service so far?" "It's fine," Tiffany muttered, avoiding his gaze. Judge Turner studied her for a moment. "Fine, huh? Let me ask you this. What have you learned?" Tiffany's mind raced. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The judge's expression didn't change. "Well," he said, adjusting his tie, "let's hope that changes. Because next week, you'll be working directly with the victims' stories. Linda will explain." Tiffany felt her stomach drop. What could he possibly mean? The following week, Linda led Tiffany to a room with one wall covered in photographs and handwritten notes. "This," Linda said, gesturing toward the display, "is the story wall. Each one of these belongs to someone impacted by reckless driving." Tiffany hesitated, then stepped closer. A photo of a smiling young girl caught her eye. Below it, a note read, "Samantha loved ballet and wanted to be a veterinarian. She was hit by a distracted driver on her way to school. She didn't make it." The words hit Tiffany like a punch. She moved to another note, this one next to a family photo. "Our dad was the glue that held us together. We miss him every day. Please don't drink and drive." Tears stung her eyes as she read more, each story heavier than the last. "You'll be helping archive these," Linda said gently. "We add new ones every month." Tiffany nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay." That night, Tiffany couldn't sleep. The stories haunted her, replaying in her mind. She thought about Chris and his scars, about the little girl who would never dance again, and the families left shattered. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Madison. OMG. Pool party at Drew's tomorrow. You in? Tiffany stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. After a long moment, she typed back. Can't. Busy. She didn't know who she was anymore, but she knew she couldn't go back to pretending nothing had changed. The next morning, Tiffany arrived at the outreach center with an uncharacteristic determination. She spent hours cataloging stories, carefully placing photos into frames. She didn't even complain when Linda asked her to clean the supply closet. You're different today, Jacob observed as they worked side by side. Yeah, well, Tiffany said, her voice quiet, I think I needed to see all of this. It's just a lot. Jacob smiled faintly. That's the point. If it doesn't change you, it's not working. By the end of the week, something remarkable happened. Tiffany volunteered to lead a group activity, helping patients paint ceramic tiles for a mural. She laughed with them, encouraged them, and for the first time, didn't think about how messy her hands were getting. Judge Turner appeared in the doorway, watching silently. When Tiffany caught his eye, she felt a strange sense of pride. She wasn't just serving time anymore, she was making a difference. Just as Tiffany starts to change, the past comes back to haunt her. A shocking twist forces her to confront the very thing she's been avoiding. Will she rise to the challenge, or fall back into her old ways? Brace yourself. This is where the story takes a dramatic turn. It was a quiet Tuesday at the outreach center when the air suddenly grew tense. Linda burst into the main hall with a newspaper in her hand, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. Tiffany, we need to talk, she said, motioning for her to follow. In Linda's office, Tiffany stared at the headline. Rich heiress avoids jail, privileged sentencing sparks outrage. Her face turned pale as she scanned the article, which detailed her reckless driving case and painted her as a spoiled rich girl who had bought her way out of trouble. The piece mentioned her family's wealth and influence, claiming it had been used to soften her punishment. This is bad, Linda said, crossing her arms. Do you understand what this means? People are going to think you're here just for show. Tiffany swallowed hard. But that's not true. I've been working hard. You've seen it. Linda's eyes softened, but her tone remained firm. Then prove them wrong. Actions speak louder than words, Tiffany. You have to show them you're here for the right reasons. The article spread like wildfire. Social media was ablaze with comments, many of them harsh. Another rich kid getting a slap on the wrist. What about the victims? She'll never understand real consequences. Her daddy's money saved her. Disgusting. Tiffany's friends began distancing themselves. Even her father called, furious. This kind of press is disastrous for the family. Fix it, Tiffany, or I will, he barked before hanging up. For the first time, Tiffany felt truly alone. Unable to bear the weight of the backlash, Tiffany requested a meeting with Judge Turner. When she entered his chambers, he greeted her with a raised eyebrow. Miss Montgomery, he said, I assume you're here about the article. Yes, she replied, her voice trembling. I know it looks bad, but I'm really trying. I just don't know how to fix this. The judge leaned forward, his expression unyielding. Fixing this isn't about convincing people, Miss Montgomery. It's about doing the work, consistently, without shortcuts. Tiffany's shoulders slumped. But no one believes I've changed. That's not your concern, Judge Turner said, his tone softening slightly. What matters is whether you believe it. The following day, Tiffany returned to the story wall. She found herself drawn to a new note pinned there. My sister was my best friend. She taught me how to ride a bike, how to dream big. Losing her to a reckless driver shattered me. I hope those responsible can find a way to make their lives count for something. Something about the note stirred Tiffany deeply. She asked Linda who had written it. Chris, Linda said. Tiffany's heart sank. Chris, the guy I've been working with? Linda nodded. He rarely talks about it, but yeah. His sister was hit by someone speeding through an intersection. Tiffany felt a lump in her throat. She realized that Chris's story wasn't just another tragedy, it was a direct reflection of her own recklessness. That afternoon, Tiffany found Chris in the garden, helping another patient adjust their wheelchair. She hesitated, then approached. "Chris," she began, her voice shaky, "can I talk to you?" He looked up, surprised. "What's up?" Tiffany took a deep breath. "I read your note on the wall. About your sister. I'm so sorry for what happened." Chris's face tightened. "Thanks, but why are you bringing it up?" Tiffany's eyes filled with tears. "Because it could have been me. I've done the same thing. I've run red lights without thinking about the consequences. And I can't stop thinking about how it could have been someone like your sister." For a moment, Chris said nothing. Then he sighed. "Well, you're here now, trying to make a difference. That counts for something." "But is it enough?" she asked, her voice cracking. Chris met her gaze, his tone gentle but firm. "It's a start." The next day, Tiffany approached Linda with a bold idea. "I want to hold a fundraiser," she said. Linda raised an eyebrow. "A fundraiser?" "For the outreach center," Tiffany explained. "And for victims of reckless driving. I want to show people that I care, and that I'm serious about making things right." Linda considered her for a moment, then nodded. "Okay. But you're organizing it. Every detail." Tiffany nodded. "I will. And I'll make it count." 2 weeks later, the Turner Outreach Center was transformed. Tiffany had poured her heart into the event, calling in favors, organizing auctions, and promoting the cause on social media. The turnout was overwhelming. Families of victims shared their stories, bringing the audience to tears. Chris spoke about his sister, his voice filled with both pain and hope. When it was Tiffany's turn, she stepped onto the stage, her hands trembling. "I'm not here to defend my past," she began. "I've made mistakes that could have cost someone their life. But being here, hearing your stories, has changed me. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to help. I want to be better." The audience fell silent. For the first time, Tiffany felt a sense of purpose. The day after the fundraiser, Tiffany was riding a wave of cautious optimism. Donations had poured in, and the event had been praised for its emotional depth. But her newfound sense of accomplishment was shattered when she stepped into the outreach center and found a familiar face waiting for her. "Madison," Tiffany said, her voice laced with confusion. Her former best friend stood with crossed arms, her expression a mix of amusement and disdain. "I saw your little charity event all over social media. Nice to see you've decided to slum it for a while." Tiffany's stomach turned. "What are you doing here?" Madison smirked. "Oh, don't worry. I'm not here to help. I'm here to remind you who you really are. You can't fool everyone with this act, Tiff. We both know it's temporary." The words stung more than Tiffany wanted to admit. "It's not an act," she said quietly. Madison's laugh echoed through the hallway. "Sure, keep telling yourself that. But remember, you can't run from who you are forever." Madison's words lingered in Tiffany's mind all day. Was she really changing, or was this just another phase? That night, she sat in her apartment, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her phone buzzed with a message from Chris. "Great job on the fundraiser. You're making a real difference." Tiffany smiled faintly. For the first time, she realized she wanted to prove Madison, and her old self, wrong. The next morning, Judge Turner called Tiffany into his chambers. "Miss Montgomery," he began, "I've received some troubling information." Tiffany's heart sank. "What kind of information?" The judge slid a file across his desk. Inside were court records showing that Tiffany's father had made a significant donation to the court's renovation fund just days before her sentencing. Her face went pale. "I didn't know about this," she said, her voice trembling. Judge Turner's gaze was steady but firm. "Whether or not you knew, this creates the appearance of impropriety. People are questioning the integrity of your sentence, and mine." Tiffany felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under her. "What can I do?" "You need to address this publicly," Judge Turner said. "Tell the truth about your journey. Show people that this wasn't about your privilege, it was about your growth." 2 days later, Tiffany stood on the steps of the courthouse. A swarm of reporters gathered around her. She took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. "I want to address the concerns about my sentencing," she began. "Yes, my father made a donation to the court. But I had no knowledge of it, and it was never my intention to use my family's wealth to avoid accountability." The crowd murmured. Cameras clicked. "I've made mistakes," Tiffany continued. "But working at the Turner Outreach Center has changed me. I've seen the impact of reckless decisions, and I'm committed to making things right, not for appearances, but because it's the right thing to do." Her voice cracked as she finished. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope to earn your trust through my actions." The apology sparked mixed reactions. Some praised her for taking responsibility, while others dismissed it as damage control. But for Tiffany, the opinions of strangers mattered less now. She was focused on the work ahead. Chris approached her later that day. "That was brave," he said. "Thanks," Tiffany replied. "I just hope it's enough." "It is," Chris said with a small smile. "Because it's real." Months passed. Tiffany continued her work at the Outreach Center, even after completing her required hours. She became a mentor to new volunteers, sharing her story and encouraging others to reflect on their actions. One day, Judge Turner visited the center unannounced. He found Tiffany helping a young boy paint a mural. "You've come a long way, Miss Montgomery," he said as she approached him. "Thanks to you," she replied. The judge smiled. "You did the work. I just gave you the opportunity." Years later, Tiffany stood in front of a packed auditorium at a fundraising gala she had organized. She was no longer the ditzy rich girl who thought she was above the law. She was an advocate, a leader, and a living testament to the power of redemption. "None of us are defined by our worst moments," she said, addressing the crowd. "We are defined by how we choose to rise above them." As the audience erupted into applause, Tiffany glanced at the front row, where Judge Turner and Chris sat, smiling proudly. Privilege may shield us from consequences, but it can't shield us from the truth. Tiffany's story reminds us that redemption isn't about erasing the past, it's about transforming it. If you've ever doubted your ability to change, remember this: it's never too late to rewrite your story.